Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. Do hit the like button as you come on because we have a great show for you today. Well, let's get started. Before our guest comes on, we have to talk about the blunder after blunder that Donald Trump has really just admitted defeat to both China and Russia as the global balance of power shifts decisively against U.S. unipolar domination. From backing down on the trade war to Vladimir Putin now declaring that Kursk is fully liberated with support of North Korean forces, we are witnessing seismic shockwaves across the geopolitical landscape. BRICS is going on its own kind of offensive. And to break down these historic developments, we have very special guest, friend of the show, journalist, geopolitical analyst, Pepe Escobar. Pepe, thank you so much for joining me. Just back from Shanghai and Hong Kong. How are you doing?
Yes, great, Danny. It's a pleasure to be with you. Yes, I flew back yesterday against my will, but I need a little break here because I'm on the road. In 3 days, I'm back on the road again. So I'm back in Bangkok to relax after an absolutely mind-boggling 2 weeks in Shanghai and Hong Kong. And I just noticed that you also have. I just noticed. Professor Zheng Wei gave me a copy.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing. I know you met with him. I look forward to seeing him.
It was fantastic. We did a seminar together in Fudan University. It was fantastic. Amazing. Well, we'll talk about that, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, let's get started then. Let us talk about Donald Trump's very haphazard economic war on China that has ostensibly ended already in defeat. I wanted to pull up this transcript of a Time magazine interview of Donald Trump's first 100 days. And I'm just going to scroll down to the section where they talk about China because I find it to be incredibly informative. So here we go. Of course, he's been wondering when he's going to get a call from Xi Jinping. So they ask him, will you call President will you call President Xi if he doesn't call you? Trump says no. You won't? He says nope. Has he called you yet? Yep. When did he call you? He's called, and I don't think it's a sign of weakness on his behalf. But would you think it's a sign of weakness if you called him and then no real answer? But this is what he had to say. What did Xi Jinping say? So Trump says, if people want to, well, we all want to make deals, but I am this giant store. It's a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. And on behalf of the American people, I own the store, and I set the prices. And I'll say, if you want to shop here, that is what you have to pay. And then, of course, they ask about Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent about how this trade war is unsustainable, Pepe. And he says, oh, I agree. You mean the way it is now? But then he goes over to this. The current moment they had to clarify with Trump. And he says, well, no, it's not sustainable. They won't do any business here because at 145% tariffs, it's going to be very rare to see business. So, Pepe, please, your reaction to what has been a real ignominious defeat on the part of the Trump administration with its economic war. And what did you learn on your trip to China regarding this? BRICS, anything that you want to talk about regarding this economic war, please, let's hear it.
Well, if you ask anybody across the global majority, do you want to shop in that big store in the US? 98% of the people are going to tell you no. Shop for what? There's nothing to buy. And what there is to buy is imported from basically China and Asia. So, but that's Trump. We're talking about. We're not talking about reality, first of all. We are talking about reality show. And we are talking about narratives and interlocked narratives that change, as he twists his fingers. He doesn't even remember what he said 5 minutes ago. So and what was fascinating, one of the most striking things in Shanghai, by 3 or 4 days in Shanghai, everybody that I was talking to across the spectrum, business people, academics, people at Guanxia, the best website for news and analysis in China, people in the streets, people living in model quarters, those residences during Maoist era and organized by the local party with that lady in the party taking care of the entrance, all that. And obviously, they are very, very curious and eager to talk to foreigners, because for a long time, Shanghai, because of COVID, and then after Omicron and lockdowns, etc., was isolated and self-isolated as well. And it was fascinating to see that how they look at Trump really as a giant circus ringmaster. They don't put it this way, of course, but this is how they see it. And the way he has been mocked across those zillions of platforms on social media, not only Weibo and TikTok, but there are countless platforms that most of them are never heard before going back to China, like basically mocked as the emperor of tariffs and as a circus clown, essentially. And then when you start talking seriously with academics, for instance, and you start to read the analysis of some of the best professors from Tsinghua, from Renmin University, from Fudan, most of them published at Guangsha, and the analysis are absolute. They know exactly what's going on in Washington. They know what's going on around Trump's circle. There was an absolutely fabulous essay. I linked to it in my last column, my second column, which came out yesterday. It was published originally in Cultural Horizon, which is probably the #1 influential cultural magazine in China. And they analyzed the triangulation at the top of the new administration of Trump 2.0. And they break it down beautifully. They break it down as Trump basically trying to constitute a super establishment, not the old East Coast, New York, Manhattan-based establishment, and the old families, the old American aristocracy, let's put it this way. Money politics around Silicon Valley, where, of course, Musk is very important, but the most important character is that extremely dangerous Peter Thiel. And, of course, the articulation of the new right around J.D. Vance, which, as we all know, is a Peter Thiel creature. So they know exactly what's going on, Danny, and all of you, our audience. So this idea that the U.S. think tanks, and unfortunately for professional reasons, and maybe with you, Danny, I receive a lot of crap on my inbox from all these think tanks for years, They have no idea how the Chinese read Washington critically and in depth, in a way that is absolutely impossible for these self-described and so-called China experts at these various think tanks simply cannot understand, for instance, how the Politburo works, how Xi Jinping takes his decisions, what's behind really these key concepts of the China dream, community of a shared future for mankind, rejuvenation of China. They simply don't understand what they mean. And you have to crack the code to understand China. These people are incapable of cracking these codes. So what do you have? You have stuff like, I'll give you an example. I bought this thing in Hong Kong. Of course, you cannot buy this book in China. It's Oxford University Press. And it's written by two Oxford scholars who live in the UK for a long time, for decades. Obviously, Rhodes Scholars, MI6, all that crap. From the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, which everybody knows is basically an MI6 vehicle. And they try to do, and if they speak Chinese, they write in Chinese, but they still cannot crack Xi. And in the end, the so-called analysis is, he's building a totalitarian state and he's posing as the ultimate dictator. because he wants Xi Jinping thought to be as important or even more important than Mao Zedong's thought. And this passes for analysis by top Oxford scholars. So it's a joke. But the other way around is serious. And of course, and the Chinese analysts, they do not underestimate American power. They try to understand how the system works, which is a sign of intellectual honesty from their part, and to try to enlighten their readers on, look, our enemy, because now it's the enemy, the system works like this, and this is what they want. And after these conversations, and for instance, talking with Professor Zhang Weiwei that you met, Danny, he's fantastic, not only because of his experience, the fact that he knows the West very well, but how he conceptualized the concept of civilization state and applying to Xi Jinping thought, let's put it this way, and how do they merge and all that. This is so sophisticated, but on a level that completely escapes US think tank land. And when you mix these cultural analysis with the economic analysis of some of the best Chinese economists, so they know exactly what they're doing. There is a consensus around the Chinese response, the official Chinese response, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, by the Minister of Commerce, which, by the way, a few days ago, in the beginning of the week, they said, no, there are no talks whatsoever. Basically, the Ministry of Commerce of China is saying that Trump is propagating fake news. Of course, in a very Chinese, very polite way, they say, no, this is not true at all. There are zero contacts. So this, let's say, is slightly more polite than that famous one 2 weeks ago, when I was in Shanghai 2 weeks ago, when they started to describe Trump as a barbarian. And that went viral all over the net. And the official definition, this one came by one of the spokesmen of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A tariff-wielding barbarian cannot expect China to pick up the phone and make a phone call. And this went mega viral. And on the net, on the social platforms, you see mockery, but with lots of sense of humor. Trump turns into an endearing character because he's so outlandish that they actually become affectionate towards him, you know. But to see all that live in front of you is an enormous shock, because all through these years, starting from the 80s and the 90s, when there were the four dragons and China was behind, and then after the entry in the WTO in the beginning of the 2000s, and then growing at 14%, and then the beginning of Xi Jinping, Chinese policy and Chinese foreign policy was very polite, was mostly passive and reactive. But now they are on the offensive. Why? Because Trump managed to do, I would say, the impossible, to antagonize 1.4 billion Chinese at the same time. And there's no turning back. Once again, because it's something that all of us who follow China know. You can do anything with China except treat them with disrespect. And the way the tariff tizzy, let's put it this way, was interpreted everywhere, starting from the DD taxi driver all the way to the Politburo, is that he treated the Chinese nation and Chinese people with extreme disrespect. And this cannot pass. This won't stand. So the response so far, it's consensual. Of course, they know the challenges. Xi Jinping, in his 2 weeks ago, he was doing a tour of Southeast Asia. For instance, some of the interlocutors, it's complicated. For instance, he went to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Cambodia, of course, lots of foreign direct investment from China. In many aspects, you can say that the Cambodian economy is a Chinese colony. You can say that. Vietnam is different. Vietnam, they are always hedging their bets between US and China. And Malaysia, with Anwar, which is an excellent prime minister, very much respected in Russia, for instance, close to Putin, but also respected by Xi Jinping. Malaysia, look, we have to be neutral, essentially. But at the same time, we have to have a common ASEAN position. That's what Anwar told Xi, which is exactly what Xi was telling Anwar. We have to fight this as a group. So when you see that in the ASEAN 10, the number one trade partner for all 10 members of the ASEAN is China. So obviously they have to fight the tariffs as a group. And some will be suffering more than others, and China will help them, of course. And even the ones who are more independent, like Vietnam, the position fighting the tariffs will be more or less the same. So Trump cannot expect a phone call from China. It's absolutely impossible because of the way he turned this into a sort of mafia operation once again. It's going to be the way I want it, or following the spectacular, misguided Miran plan, the guy who came up with the Mar-a-Lago agreement, basically saying, look, there are two options for all of you, and that from China and everybody else. You can pay the tariffs without complaining, and that's it. And there's no other option, essentially. So what kind of dialogue is inbuilt in all that? It's impossible. But it was great to see live in Shanghai the response from all sectors of society, and at the same time, reflecting their newfound pride of, number one, there won't be another century of humiliation, very, very important, and no humiliation whatsoever, starting with this one, which is they considered an enormous attempt at humiliating China. And at the same time, let's constitute China as, we can say, a sort of vanguard or one of the leaders of a united front. When I heard the first time the term united front, I said, wow, this is Mao all over again, upgraded. Mao was talking about the United Front as early as in the late 50s already, especially in the 60s. And also the one that when I heard the first time, was outstanding, Paper Tiger. Paper Tiger is back. And once again, first time that Mao talked about Paper Tiger was related to Chiang Kai-shek, was still in the 50s. But in the 60s, many of us who were teenagers in the 60s, like my generation, we remember Paper Tiger applied by people in May 68 in France, Godard movies, liberation movies in Latin America. The definition of the American empire is the American empire is a paper tiger. This came straight from Mao, all over. And now they're using Paper Tiger all over again and say, look, if they were a Paper Tiger in the 60s, can you imagine now? So it was fascinating to see these adaptations of Maoist thought and Maoist metaphors and images, So they are doing their homework. They're doing their homework for the past few decades. They're looking at the continuum. They understand how the empire is desperate because of Chinese power. And when you look in front of you at these intimations of especially high-tech finesse, it's no wonder that the empire is desperate. Danny, I went to test a Huawei Mate 70 Pro Plus, which is definitely the best smartphone on the planet. Anyway, it's absolutely mind-boggling, in fact. But then I was talking to the geek, a wonderful geek girl. She said, look, it's complicated for you to use this in the West. There is a trick. We among us, we have a Chinese app. We could give it to you. If you download this Chinese app, which is more or less underground, then you can download a lot of stuff, including Google, etc. But it's risky. So that's why for us Western barbarians, it's very complicated to have a Huawei phone operates in the Harmony OS system, But when you look at the actual product, and say, look, everybody else, Apple is going to come up with something like this maybe in 10 years, if ever. And of course, all those outstanding SUVs, which when you get inside, it's like you are in a cinema with 4K, completely unbelievable. And of course, everything else. They have now a new high-speed train, 400 kilometers an hour between Beijing and Shanghai, which they started to test this past few days. Orders for their new commercial airliner, a thorium-based nuclear, you name it, everything. So it is very, very impressive, all that. And always comes back to the impotence of the empire looking at all that. Okay, so what are we going to do? Okay, let's tariff them. Let's clobber them.
Yeah, maybe you could talk about what you learned briefly before we move on to the Kursk situation. I wanted to ask you briefly about what you learned about BRICS, because you talk about this war on BRICS.
Yes.
And it really is intensifying in many ways. This tariff phenomenon is one of them. Now, I wanted to just pull up this image because you mentioned in your article that Trump does not hold really any cards. The United States is not holding any cards in this situation. And this is kind of a funny way of putting it. What do you bring to the table, Donald Trump? I made the table. China. So
I made the table.
So talk about
everything else.
Talk about what you learned from BRICS about BRICS while you were there, because in this war on BRICS, because one of the key things that I've noticed is that China has really put an emphasis on, well, if you're going to tariff us, yeah, you actually don't have the cards, and we have a plethora of friends that we can rely on to ensure our own survival and, of course, forward progress development.
Well, it is a war. Even before the tariffs, we knew from the beginning that one of the planks of Trump 2.0 would be a hybrid war against BRICS, selected BRICS, including BRICS partners. With the tariffs, we know that it's a war against one of the top BRICS, China, many of the partners, many of the members and many of the partners. And it's a war against the global south and the global majority and the emergence of the global majority and a more unified global majority, a united front, to quote Mao and China again, where China is one of the leaders. The other ones would be Russia and possibly Iran, depending on how it goes from now on. So I started a sort of informal BRICS tour, Danny. In fact, it happened by accident, but now it's becoming a BRICS tour. Because coming back from China, I'm going to Iran next week. And then by the end of next month, I'll be back in Russia. And this will be in preparation to go into the BRICS summit in Brazil, in Rio, in early July. So it is a BRICS tour in a sense. And when I get to Rio, probably I'll have a pretty good picture of how the BRICS are maneuvering their meetings, their preparatory meetings, the Sherpas, the BRICS Business Council, which are people that I plan to talk to when I go back to Russia. Because now the BRICS under Brazil in early July, they have a rare earth style opportunity to politely, in a very sophisticated manner, indirectly, but forcefully respond to the Trump tariff offensive. Because the offensive is directed against most of them and to a great deal of the global south. And this will include how the models that they were testing in terms of alternative payment systems, how they are progressing. I want to see if there is, if it's getting deeper in terms of the unit, for instance, which so far is the best system, completely different and bypassing completely SWIFT. What are the next steps? BRICS Bridge, which was inspired by Bridge, and we have several BRICS members which are involved in it, including Thailand and Saudi Arabia still on the fence, and the Emirates, and the People's Bank of China, very, very important, and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. I talked a little bit about this in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong was very much into Bridge. And China could use Hong Kong a lot if the BRICS decide to amplify a BRICS bridge, which doesn't need currency at all. So all this is progressing for the more or less underground. And of course, there is a problem of time because there are only 3 months before the BRICS summit in Rio. They are going to have only one big meeting per month before early July, which is not enough. So they are fighting against time, but at the same time, they have this extra incentive to come up with something really, really strong, which will be interpreted all over the global south and the global majority as the response of the united front to this circus-like Trump tariff offensive. So there are some auspicious aspects to the whole story, you know. And the fact that the Chinese are now very much geared to be on the forefront and start leading, which they were not until a while ago. This is something that I heard a lot in Moscow, that for the Chinese is more important the Belt and Road, the New Silk Roads, than BRICS. Now, we can say that they are on the same level. Of course, 150 nations all over the world that are part of Belt and Road. There are projects like the South Pacific Maritime Silk Road from the port of Chancay in Peru to Shanghai, which is absolutely outstanding and caught the Americans completely flat-footed in this whole story. For instance, a few days ago, the Chinese sent a very, very important delegation to Brazil to start studying the possibility of building what is called the by-ocean railway from Brazil to Peru and then connecting to Shanghai all the way to Shanghai. It's an enormous challenge, but the only ones who could pull that off are the Chinese. So this is one detail. Another detail, in Central Asia, the Chinese are talking to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan to upgrade a railway from China to Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and then all the way from Central Asia to Iran or Russia and beyond, part of one of the corridors, one of the Silk Road corridors. So this is very, very important. All these moves of interconnected moves, part of Belt and Road, they'll start to pick up speed from now on, and a lot of speed, and a lot of extra Chinese investment. And inside China, they are not worried about the effects because they know that the percentage of trade from China to the US compared to their global trade is very, very small. And in Hong Kong, for instance, 2 or 3 days ago, I was talking about this. Imports and exports of Hong Kong, which, as you all know, is a mega, the port is a monster. And the whole planet imports and exports to Hong Kong back and forth. It's between 3% and 4.5% imports and exports. And most of Hong Kong trade, over 50% of Hong Kong trade, is with China. So even if Trump decides to, we never know what's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to tariff Hong Kong port. It's not a big deal because they will keep doing trade with most of the global south and over 50% with China itself. So they're not worried. And this will also accelerate the integration of Hong Kong with southern China. Very, very important. It's something that the Atlanticist elites in Hong Kong were trying to procrastinate, but now there's no more reason. So the Greater Bay Area, how they call it, Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai, and the cities of the Pearl River Delta, all the way to Shenzhen, Guangzhou, this integration, this enormous cluster, now is going to pick up speed. So they are not worried about the short and midterm. And when we look at the high-tech sectors, and then we get to the Made in China 2025 territory, where they are already number 1 in 7 of these fields, and soon in the 8th, and for the next 2 or 3 years, they will be the top on all 10, which was the original plan when they conceived it in 2015. Which brings us, Danny, to the AI front, where we have big news concerning NVIDIA and Huawei. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, he's terrified that because of tariffs, he's going to lose the Chinese market. And that's why he went to Beijing to say to the Chinese government, face to face with the business suit, look, you're very important. I'm not going to abandon you, whatever happens, etc. Why did he do that? For several reasons. Number 1, he's afraid to lose the Chinese market. Number 2, he knows that Huawei is going to take over completely the Chinese market, and NVIDIA will be history in China and in, let's say, in the China sphere of influence, let's put it this way, across Asia. And now the Kirin, how Huawei's Kirin chip is catching up with NVIDIA very, very fast. This is something I would like to talk about in my next and final column about China, with some details from experts, So this is starting to change the AI front, which is the key technological front from an American and Silicon Valley point of view. So when you put this all together, let's say the horizon for China at different levels is not problematic at all, and they are confident. And this was the most important element, Danny, the feeling of self-confidence reflected in the way they act, the way they talk, the way they look at the future, the way they look at China's relations with the rest of the global south, etc. Resilience, a feeling of resistance. Now we are at the vanguard of resistance against this empire out of control. So when you compare this to China in these past few decades, it's a completely different mindset. It's extremely impressive. You start feeling it, and then when conversations develop, you start listening from your interlocutors, directly. Extremely, I was immensely impressed with that. And the fact that they are proud of themselves, proud of what they've done, proud of what they accomplished. And they are not antagonistic. They are not revengeful. They don't want to, do anything rash vis-a-vis the US. They just want to be treated fairly, and they are open for a diplomatic negotiation. This is the key word, diplomatic.
Yeah. And finally, before we move on to the more Russia front, I did want to I feel like there was just a flurry of developments too that kind of represent this. You had a recent Ipsos poll that shows 49% of people throughout 29 countries, 22,000 adults, say that they believe China will have a positive impact on the world more than the United States. Then you also have recent announcements that Russia's oil exports to China are once again up after a bit of a fall.
Yes.
And then you also have China, along with Russia, really taking the lead on the so-called Iran nuclear question, recently meeting with the IAEA, directly. And of course, you had Foreign Minister of Iran, Mr. Ragachi, in Beijing meeting with Wang Yi. And so leading off, and both of them announced a golden era in relations. So you have, again, I mean, when we talk about leadership and BRICS' leadership, it does feel like accelerated immensely under the Trump administration. So just in such a short period of time, your comments, Pepe, on this?
Well, I've been defining them for quite a while now as the new Primakov triangle. I'm sure many of you remember the original Primakov triangle when Yevgeny Primakov, the late Russian foreign minister, absolutely brilliant, who, by the way, started as a journalist, as a task correspondent in the Middle East in the good old days, meeting Nasser, Saddam Hussein, you name it. Primakov, in the late 90s, he conceptualized Russia, India, and China as the future of relations across Eurasia. He was ahead of everybody else. Now we can say, over 25 years later, we can say that the new Primakov triangle is Russia, Iran, and China, because of their interlocking strategic partnerships. Three BRICS, three very active BRICS, unlike India, which is not a very active BRICS member. And now on top of it, we have India, Pakistan, which is an enormously fishy story. Very, very fishy, which is something that could be solved inside the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where they're both members. And Russia and China are certainly talking. Can we get these two together so they solve this thing, which is obviously provoked by outside actors? Divide and rule once again, India against Pakistan. And Iran, by the way, already offered their services. Iran is also a member of the SCO. And Arakshi already said, look, we have friendly ties with both India and Pakistan. We can be mediators. They can sit at the table and we'll sit them at the table and we'll be the mediators. Right. But the most important thing is that the new Primakov triangle, in many aspects, because Trump is at war at different levels with the three of them, even if he's trying to solve the war that the US initiated, by the way, the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. But of course, the Trump way, which is a sort of Tony Soprano-like, let's grab a pizza and do a deal kind of solving the war. The tariff war against China. And of course, once again, the threats of bombing Iran if Iran doesn't follow his JCPOA 2.0. So obviously they have their interlocking strategic partnerships. They have the very, very important deal that they signed, Iran and Russia, in late January in Moscow, which is not a military alliance, but it has, as Putin would define it, technical military provisions. They have the fact that even before the negotiations, the indirect negotiations in Oman started between the US and Iran, there were two very important meetings with the Primakov triangle. First in Beijing and the next one in Moscow. So they are talking all the time, and they are talking all the time on how Russia and China are behind the Iranian position if there is an adult, not breakable by Donald Trump again, JCPOA 2.0. At the moment, we have no idea. At least they are talking, and that's enormous. So obviously, and not to mention the geoeconomic permutations of the relationship inside the Primakov triangle. From the point of view of China, Iran is a matter of national security, and Iran is essential for the new Silk Roads connected to Central Asia, and then Iran as a crossroads by the Belt and Road from east to west. And the international north-south transportation corridor, which is Russia, Iran, and in this case, India, which India should be paying attention to, because from the point of view of India, this is the Indian New Silk Road via Iran, via the port of Chabahar in Iran, which I hope to have a chance to visit in the next few days. And I asked them to try to arrange a visit to the port of Chabahar when I am in Iran. I want to see it by myself. And the International North-South Transportation Corridor is the chance of India to have more trade, not only with Russia and Iran, but from Iran to Central Asia, Afghanistan, parts of Central Asia. So the interlocked relationship of the Primakov Triangle is essential, and they are on the same wavelengths. Very, very important. They are meeting personally practically every week. Next month, we're going to have the mega summit in Moscow around the May 9 Victory Day parade between Putin and Xi. And Pezeshkian is going to be there as well. And Lula is going to be there as well. So this is a pre-BRICS summit in Moscow next month. So that's the, once again, the auspicious, in a Chinese sense, aspect of it all, that they are talking all the time. And obviously they are talking towards the nooks and crannies of building the multinodal, multipolar world. That's where we are.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. I mean, it has been incredible to watch, because it does really seem like, and from, I think people are underestimating this, that with all of these flashpoints, as you mentioned, Ukraine, Iran, and of course this economic war with China, there is this convergence. You have this unity that you mentioned that is getting stronger and stronger as the United States continues its attempt to isolate and disband them to the point where it seems like these policies are actually just bringing them together even further and accelerating that process to heights that I didn't think it was going to be this fast. Your final comments on this before we move on to Russia?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. So your final comments on this before we move on to Russia? Did you hear me?
No. I didn't catch it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Let's go to Russia. Well, these past 2 weeks I was totally into China, so maybe I missed a lot of stuff.
Well,
in Russia.
we can pull this up. It's actually big, and I think it really. So I think this really ties into the BRICS theme, even though maybe the party here that is the most shocking about this announcement. So for those who aren't aware, Russia has announced that it has fully liberated Kursk. And in a message by General Gerasimov, he said this: soldiers and officers of the Korean People's Army performed combat tasks shoulder to shoulder with Russian soldiers repelling the Ukrainian invasion. They showed high professionalism, resilience in battle, courage, and heroism. Pepe, for so long, and I know that this tie into the BRICS theme, because I think we are seeing, even though DPRK, North Korea, isn't in BRICS, we know that BRICS has kind of formed almost an umbrella over the DPRK so that it can survive economically, especially. But for so long, we were told that North Korean troops, they're there, and Russia said very little. On the day of liberation, Russia announces this while there are these negotiations with the United States going on, and Russia keeps pounding Ukraine to the point where here's what Donald Trump had to say, Pepe, on his Truth Social. With all that being said, there's no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days. It makes me think he doesn't want to stop the war, maybe just tapping me along, and has to be dealt with differently through banking and secondary sanctions. In my opinion, Pepe, people say Trump is playing 5D chess. I think Russia and BRICS are playing the real chess here as they navigate this situation. What's your take on this, given the liberation of Kursk?
And it's this narrative that he's worried about soldiers dying in Russia, in Ukraine this way. This is beyond BS. And obviously not a word about Palestinian civilians dying by the tens of thousands, victims of his buddy's genocide. So this is, and the whole global South sees through it. Absolutely. And obviously, he doesn't know what's really going on. Russia does not bomb civilian targets. So this is, once again, he's being fed misinformation by silos at the CIA, at Pentagon, his own National Security Council, etc. So it's bullshit, once again. The fact that Trump, as we all know, doesn't read. His attention span is 10 seconds maximum for any issue. He doesn't pay attention to anybody. Very few people actually get his ear. He doesn't follow geopolitics. He doesn't read geopolitics. He doesn't understand geopolitics. He's not a strategist. So it's basically a off-the-cuff intuition here and there, or something that he dreamt at 3 in the morning awake in his bedroom. He tries to turn this into a policy. So it's never a policy because it doesn't have a beginning, and usually they have no end. They are, floating bubbles. So it's very complicated to deal with that. And of course, his compulsion to basically completely dominate the news cycle on a daily basis, and preferably on an hourly basis. So the whole news cycle, and theoretically the whole diplomatic movement all across the chessboard, is always subordinated to something that he said, the most outrageous thing possible, or that he publishes in his social media, and everybody reacts to it. So in terms of controlling the narrative, nobody does it better than him. But that's about it. Controlling the narrative doesn't mean he's controlling geopolitical and geoeconomic processes. They are extremely complex and that escape him completely. So that's a completely different thing, So in terms of it's like if you are a one-man band and you have one hit single, and that's it, and then you erase. This was the history of most of pop music so far. That's his case, and he doesn't have a string of hit records at all. He doesn't even know what a hit record is. Otherwise, he wouldn't have listened to his three stooges, who sold him on the idea of the tariffs: Navarro, Besant, and Miran. We can call him the Three Stooges now.
Yeah, and from my view, Pepe, with Kursk especially, this big announcement of Kursk liberation, it's just another example of what I think is the Trump. People thought the Trump administration was coming in almost like peace through strength. It's coming in with strength. It was going to reverse things regarding U.S. foreign policy from the Biden era. But from how I see it, is that a lot of Trump's approach to all of these questions relating to this war on BRICS, it's almost a foretold conclusion. With Russia in particular, maybe you can comment on this. He's taken a softer posture toward Putin, and to some degree, and then making threats on others, in my assessment, because what else is he going to do? Russia, through announcing Kursk liberation, made it very clear that it is ready to make even more advances. It's winning. Yeah. And so what else can Trump do? So your thoughts on this, especially
be less incoherent, Danny, be less incoherent. There's absolutely zero coherence on anything he says, publishes, and 10 seconds later backtracks, you name it. So we should never forget that he's dealing with rational actors. For instance, this blah, blah, blah that he's talking with the Chinese go on the record right away, say, no, it's fake news. He's lying, essentially. The blah, blah, blah about a ceasefire, the Russians don't say anything. The Russians are extremely reticent to react to speculation. They deal with facts, and they wait. When there is a fact, Peskov relates the facts. Or in the case of Gerasimov today, he was relating a fact. We liberated Kursk. So anybody that follows can, he doesn't even to get into the detail to explain to the rest of the world, look, NATO and MI6, they thought that they would use 76,000 now dead Ukrainian soldiers to get a piece of our territory. Look what happened to them. That's the subtext of Gerasimov reading his press release, you know. And Iran, the same thing. Iran said, okay, we can negotiate, but if our rights and our national security is respected. This is essentially what Khamenei wrote in his letter to Trump. But on the other side, what do we have? We have this non-stop circus, literally, you know. So it's extremely difficult to organize a diplomatic environment conducive to practical solutions. It's already a miracle that the indirect negotiations are going on between Iran and the US. So we can give some credit to Witkoff. Very good. As we can give him some credit in terms of his talks with Putin, because Witkoff is a lawyer, Putin's also a lawyer, they can talk legalese. And so they found probably a mechanism to understand each other. And of course, Putin knows that Witkoff is whatever Trump wants to tell him, Putin, he's telling through Witkoff. So that helps as well. But it's not a traditional diplomatic negotiation, especially when you know that one of the sides, Trump, he has absolutely no clue about the reasons for the SMO and the background leading to the SMO. Not to mention the Kafkaesque absurdity of the Empire of Chaos, who initiated the war in the first place, now is mediating between Russia and Ukraine to finish the war. It doesn't get more Kafka than that, right? So in terms of a rational geopolitical discussion, we are in a completely different territory. Nobody knows really what this non-stop circus is leading to. Especially because now in foreign policy, he's fighting on three very, very, very complex fronts. And there's no evidence that he can deliver in any of these three. Let's say that the least complex, it's extremely complex, but he would have a chance if, and apparently it's starting to, he's finally admitting that Crimea is Russian. This is an enormous step.
Yeah.
So the next step will be to admit that Donbass is Russian. We're getting there little by little. After that, then okay. So assuming we freeze the whole thing in the line of contact, and the Russians already said, no, we don't want a freeze. We want a long-term solution. Then the real negotiation will start. Revolving around what will be the real status of Ukraine. In Trump's mind, okay, this is like could be light years away. You know, he doesn't think around these terms. He wants a piece of paper saying we got a deal. It's not going to happen, and the Russians already very politely are telling him via Witkoff, no, this is the beginning, and the beginning includes normalizing our relations. Ukraine is just a piece of the enormous puzzle, which is nuclear issues, spheres of influence, you name it. But can you imagine trying to impress this to Trump in 2 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes? Impossible. And of course, with China, forget it. He blew it from the beginning. Because of his procedure, his non-method, blew the whole thing. And with Iran, he'll have to, Witkoff has to tell me, look, if you keep threatening to bomb these guys, these are very rational actors. You know, you're not going to get your deal. Forget it. Especially because they know that you broke the first one. What makes them think that you're not going to break the next one? So he is at a disadvantage in all three of these fronts. And when you add, Danny, which is something that you know well, you are in the US, his internal enemies, then it gets even more complex, the whole thing. So in a sense, after three months, his presidency is already besieged from all sides.
Yeah.
And he doesn't work. He doesn't work well when he's besieged from all sides, as we all know.
Well, what's interesting is that Donald Trump will often say one thing and then say another thing. So in this plan that has been supposedly leaked, some people call it the Kellogg plan, the plan that says there will be de facto recognition of Crimea, as you said, big step, or at least, you know, a step that is in the right direction. De jure recognition of Russia's control of the territories in the Donbass. However, while that's a step, it doesn't recognize that they, you know, that's a part of the Russian Federation, recognize that they have military control for now. But what he's saying now, after the Pope's funeral, after he met with Zelensky on the sideline during the Pope's funeral, he's saying that, no, it's absolutely unacceptable that we'll ever recognize the Donbass as part of Russia. So there's always flip-flopping. But I think one thing I want you to comment on this, though, the significance of the DPRK, Russia, first of all, announcing that they were participating in these, in the Kursk liberation. What is the significance of this? Because I you know, for me, this was an astounding announcement from Russia that I think really underscores where the world situation is right now, and just how important Russia and BRICS and the multipolar world view their partnerships, to the point where we're seeing this is an outright military alliance. Now that we know that it is 100% true that the DPRK was standing side by side with Russia.
And it's very Russian, Danny. They never advertise these things. You know, all of us are observing. We suspect there's something going on. And then one day they announce that, yes, it's happening. But they announced at the last minute, when it was already a fait accompli. Yes, we liberated Kursk, and they were North Koreans. Of course, these North Koreans were not in the front lines. Everybody knows that. They were in the back. They were advisors. They were learning, but they were there. So this implies graphically military collaboration in a war front, direct military collaboration between Pyongyang and Moscow. It is enormous. On one hand, it's predictable. If you go to the Vladivostok Forum for the past few years, you knew that a lot of stuff was brewing in terms of closer collaboration between North Korea and Russia. And one of them, military cooperation as well. So now we're seeing some of these results. There'll be others as well. But that's the difference. The Russians don't need to blah, blah, blah. They're very discreet. And when they announce something that already happened.
Yeah. And talk about the alliance. Maybe we can begin to close up, because
it's not an alliance.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about, because it's being framed important as that. Actually, let me just pull up something really quick before you comment, because there's a lot of freakouts just in general about not just the DPRK situation, as we've known in the Western media, just constantly talking about how the DPRK and Russia are working together in Kursk. Now we know that's true, but of course, the freakout was very intentional. And then you also have, even around nuclear negotiations, with Donald Trump and the presidential administration is committed to, there is still, the Foundations for Defense of Democracy, you mentioned earlier, these think tanks. This is a literal State Department think tank headed by Mr. Asher. a hawk of the highest degree, been in the State Department for years, decades. Our friends in China, Russia, Iran, and China jointly meet ahead of negotiations. And in this, they talk about how this is all about a reminder, along with North Korea, that China, Russia, and Iran are members of an emerging axis of aggressors whose common and collaborative cause is to diminish American power and forge a new global order they seek to dominate. So this is what we're getting. But for me to see Russia say that DPRK, yes, was with us in this fight, was a strong message, a huge message, I think, to even the entirety of the collective West that's been a party to what Putin and Gerasimov both said was neo-Nazis trying to take Russian land and being defeated in the process.
Danny, these FDD imbeciles, they don't even know what really happened. Russia, China, and Iran sent their representatives at the IAEA to tell Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, now you have to do what you should be doing from the beginning and act like a political and technical liaison to explain to the Americans what should be done if there is a JCPOA 2.0. This is what happened. So to qualify this as axis of aggressors, it doesn't even qualify as stupidity. It's lower than stupidity. But what do you expect with from think tanks like that? You know. But of course, from large sectors of the Beltway, the new axis of evil is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And now, wow, now it's in front of them. So next stop, where? They're going to conquer Berlin again or Paris? Oh, gosh. It's too stupid. No. I think I'm getting too old for this shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just, I think what we're witnessing in your final words on this as we get ready to head out is we are witnessing the Trump administration came in and attempted to approach the most important players of BRICS with various means of hostility, with of course coercion, coercion, and even the negotiations. We know with Russia, we know that there's a lot of baiting and switching and attempts to impose certain conditions that are unacceptable to Russia, which is why they've gone the way they've gone, which is they've gone smoothly, but with very little in the way of concrete implementation of any kind of new policy. So all in all, we see that but most concretely with Iran, with China, and now Russia, we're seeing this attempt really flail and fail on the part of the new U.S. administration, which for all intents and purposes, while it definitely doesn't look the same, we are seeing this war on BRICS blow back in the face of the United States. And I'm curious on your final thoughts on where you see this going, because you are studying this so deeply and going around the world, traveling and understanding this better. Where do you see this going as we move post-Kursk liberation and into the BRICS summit? How do you see Donald Trump's and the United States' overall direction?
Well, it's interesting because this what's been happening gave me an extra reason to start believing that this BRICS summit could be something really groundbreaking. So coming from China, going to Iran, and then back to Russia before going to Brazil for the summit, I think would be essential to get the big picture among the BRICS, the big BRICS. For the next few days, all of us will have to understand what's really going on between India and Pakistan and who caused that. Of course, we all suspect who caused that. but the implementation was very, very shoddy. And the fact that both India and Pakistan are falling into the trap is also very, very worrying. They're both members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. One of them is a member of BRICS, and one of them has a strategic partnership with China in the Belt and Road. So this is very, very, very serious. But the next 3 months before the summit in Rio, probably they will originate extra headaches for Donald Trump. Because if the Chinese, with their newfound united front mentality, really start working hard to agglutinate the BRICS into a common geoeconomic position, for instance, there have been rumbles from China from yesterday to today about an IMF reform. They haven't talked about this in quite a while. Suddenly, they're back on it all over again. And of course, what they're going to do in terms of counteracting the tariffs. So everything is at play the next 3 months. They will be essential. And we could arrive in Rio in early July in a situation that, okay, now it's clear. It's the sole empire on one side, out of control, against 80% of the global south and the global majority. So the clash will be, frontal. And then we're going to start a new era. For the moment that we are at the interregnum, it could veer any other way. Or Trump could have an excess of rationality. Don't count on it, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. I know, Pepe, it's a late evening for you. Everybody, I want to say thanks so much for joining. You want to hit the like button and leave a comment if you can too. That all helps boost engagement, and it helps keep the stream going in the algorithm so more people hear what Pepe had to say. The like button is the most important. That will keep this thing going. If you haven't hit it already, you can find Pepe's article that he wrote in Strategic Culture. It's a second article on China in his trip and what it means in the video description. And you can also find all the places to support this work: Patreon, Substack, and so many other places. Pepe, anything you want to say before we head out of here?
No, that's it. I will have a new call, the third of this mini trilogy on China, coming in the beginning of next week, probably on Sputnik. So, go to my Telegram channel and you have all the links, including the link to Dennis' show. Everything.
Yes. Also, you can find Pepe's Telegram and X in the video description too. Pepe, I won't see you for a little bit because I know you're traveling. I'm actually heading to China next month too, so we'll have to reconnect after, probably later in the month of May, or
yeah, exactly, before I'm back in Russia. You bet.
Yeah. So let's do it. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Hit that like button before you go. Thank you so much also to the 2 super chats, Mark and God is in our hearts. Thank you so much for those, and bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.